Okay, well, as Annette said, thank you for giving up your time this evening to hear a bit about the early years funding for 2024-25 in Cambridgeshire. The presentation this evening splits into different sections. I'm going to be talking firstly about the funding rates, and then something more going back to talk about the new entitlements themselves, what's happening when. That's the bulk of the presentation. Then a little bit about local authority support for the new entitlement, a reference to the new guidance and the arrangements around funding and charging, and then an opportunity for you to ask questions. So I shall move on and talk about the funding rates for 2024-2025. One of the questions that was raised, and thank you to those of you who filled in the web form to let us know that you were coming and to send in any questions that you wanted to pick up. Hopefully the presentation this evening addresses some of those, and one of them was, how is the rate arrived at? So this slide talks about who decides what the rate is. This goes back to information that was released by the Department for Education. So central government sets separate rates for each of the local authorities in England based on their local costs and needs. So if you look around the country, you'll see different rates for different parts of the country. And these are based on local cost and need. And sometimes what you'll see in the press is an average, is a national average. Those rates are published to us, and then we have a duty to consult with our providers. And in Cambridgeshire, we do that particularly through our local early years provider reference group. And I'm pleased to say that some of the group are here on the meeting this evening. And I have to say that we're hugely grateful to them who worked with us and our colleagues in school finance to agree proposals for funding in a very, very short timescale either side of Christmas. And when we had a meeting with the reference group, their priorities were that we got information out to the sector at large as soon as we could to give as much time as possible for the planning. They were also concerned that we maximised the rate that was paid for 2-year-olds, recognising that the DFE rate that was published is close to what many people see as their break-even point. And their third request priority was to make sufficient funding available as best we could to support the inclusion of children with special educational needs and disabilities. So those three things informed our work. Those proposals were shared with you at the point when they were put forward for consideration by our schools forum, which is an essential part of the process. Local authorities have to send that information through to their schools forum for consideration. And the schools forum looks at the amount that the local authority holds back for its central spend and approves that. But the final decision on those funding rates is taken by our Children and Young People's Committee. And as soon as we had the information written in those reports, we gave them to you. We gave the rates to you as provisional information. And then we confirmed that last week after the meeting of Children and Young People's Committee. So we have told you what we could, when we could, and we've taken the reference group's views on board in getting those rates confirmed to you as soon as we possibly could. So something before I get onto the numbers themselves, the information that government publishes, and you'll often see those numbers, is the total amount that is given to Cambridgeshire in respect of each child of a particular age based on the number of hours that we're likely to be funding. We now have 3 of those rates. I'll say a bit more about that later, but 3 and 4-year-olds for 2-year-olds and under 2s. That's the sort of headline figure, and we have to take off that anything that we pay for supplements. We don't have many supplements in Cambridgeshire. We have a deprivation supplement for 3 and 4-year-olds. And we have SEN inclusion funding, which up until this year was only for 3 and 4-year-olds, or was only taken from the 3 and 4-year-old allocation. The other thing that headline figure has to fund is our central local authority expenditure, which contributes to the support we provide, the costs of intervention, which is one of our statutory functions, support for children with special educational needs and disability, safeguarding, our training activity, our qualifications centre, and other things. Another aspect of what we do, which also is reflected in that, is how we work with and engage other agencies, other bodies, other public bodies and services to ensure that the early years and childcare sector is reflected and included in policies and activity, sometimes called system leadership. So we're part of that dialogue around early years and childcare more broadly and how that fits into other things that happen. We sent out a paper from the DFE called an Easy Explainer, which is hyperlinked on the end of this presentation. We sent that out early in the new year, but it also explains something about how that headline rate isn't the amount that ultimately you get paid per hour. Government does keep an eye on and monitor how much of that funding we distribute to our providers and how much of it goes on our central functions. And it requires us to distribute, to give out to you at least 95% of that total amount. So far, that's only been 95% of the 3 and 4-year-old amount, but it will now be looked at separately for the 3 and 4-year-olds, 2-year-olds, and the working families from 9 months to 2 years old when that funding comes on stream in September. Just to say that the 95% is based on everything that we distribute, so it includes supplements and SENF and so on. And that figure will increase to 97% in the future. Okay, that's all the context. So if I tell you about the actual rates that we are intending to pay from April, and these are now approved, so these will be our rates for next year. So reading down the table, the rate for 3 and 4-year-olds will be £5.40 per hour. That's over in the right-hand column. The rate for funded 2-year-olds will be £8 per hour. Those are the targeted 2s that we're going to be calling that category from now on. The new 2-year-old funding allocation for working parents will also be paid at £8 per hour. The younger children from 9 months up to 2 years of working families will be coming on from September 2024, and those will be paid at £10.70 per hour. 2 additional elements at the bottom. The early years pupil premium will go up 2 pence per hour to 68 pence, and that will be extended to eligible children for any of the funded places. And similarly with the Disability Access Fund, which is currently at £881 per year, it's going up to £910 per year from April. Just a quick few observations on those changes for 2024. You'll know that the rate went up in the middle of the year, in September 2023. It's gone up again for 3 and 4 year olds. We've had an increase of 30 pence per hour. We've passed on 26 of that 30 pence per hour. So we've passed on 87% of that. We were unable to pass on all of it because of the pressures on CENIF and the constraints on local authority budgets, which have required us to keep a little bit of that back. So obviously we passed on all the increase during last year. We're not able to pass on all of it quite in April. Similarly for 2 year olds, where the rate went up significantly in September 2023, we passed on that full amount. The increase from that rate to our new rate from the government was very small, just 3 pence per hour. And we now are drawing the SEN inclusion funding for 2 year olds from our 2 year old allocation. That was not permitted up until this point. And so we think it's quite important that we link that funding to the relevant age group. In practice, that means we're going to be paying a little bit less from April than we are at the moment. But for 2 year olds, targeted 2 year olds, and any other 2 year olds who are eligible for early years pupil premium, that will be payable for those children, and that will be at 68 pence per hour extra. So if they're in receipt of EYPP, they will be picking up a lot more than they would do currently under the funded twos. And then finally on the under twos, which are not coming in until September, we will also be able to pay SEN inclusion funding for that age bracket, and we will be taking that element of CENIF from that specific allocation. That's just a few comments on the numbers for the new financial year. Let me go on now to talk a little bit about the new entitlements. Almost to go back a step, I guess, and just explain what it's all about, really. Just to recap, hopefully this isn't all not too much old news, too familiar to you. But the new expanded entitlements, the key thing to say is that they are for working families only. There's no universal element to this new introduction from government. It only applies to working families. So it's very similar criteria to the extended entitlement, the so-called 30 hours for 3 and 4 year olds. It's going to apply to 2 year olds from April 2024, and it will apply to children from 9 months up to 2 years from September 2024. Those are the new things. All the other entitlements remain unchanged. So the universal entitlement for 3 and 4 year olds, what we currently call Fund 2s, which we'll be calling targeted 2 year olds. So those 2 year olds receiving certain benefits or who are in care or were previously in care. And the extended entitlement for 3 and 4 year olds of working families, they all stay the same. Okay, so that's who. In terms of what, the entitlement will be of similar kind of duration, the same duration as the universal entitlement. So it will be 570 hours per year from when children become eligible. So that's the equivalent of 15 hours per week if it's non-stretched or term time, as some people might refer to it. And it applies in this way. It applies for 2-year-olds from working families. And it will apply in the same eligibility age blocks. So children will become eligible from the funding period after they reach the relevant age. So those are the kind of birth dates that will qualify for the new entitlement. So for the summer 2024, children who were born up to the 31st of March 2022 will be eligible from our summer funding period, which starts on the 1st of April. And similarly, there are those cut-off dates for autumn and for spring. And they're also there for the children from 9 months upwards. Probably not going to dwell too much on those now. I'm going to focus, I think, on what's happening from April. You may have seen in the press that there have been a few teething troubles with the new system, but this is what needs to happen when, in terms of taking up the new entitlement. So children who were born up to the 31st of March 2022, eligible in the summer funding period, parents need to apply via Childcare Choices by the 31st of March 2024. That's the cut-off date. If they miss the cut-off date, they will miss their entitlement for the summer term. If they're already using tax-free childcare, they won't be able to apply for their new funded hours until their reconfirmation window. So at their next reconfirmation date, they can then apply and should get the additional entitlement. You may also have seen in the sector press in the last day or so that DfE has put out some additional guidance, which is with us at the moment. We're looking at it and we'll send it out to you imminently. But what it's telling us is that if children were born on or after the 15th of February 2022 and before the 31st of March and are using tax-free childcare now, they will receive a letter with a temporary code that will give them eligibility, that will guarantee their eligibility for the summer funding period. And they will be able to use that, bring that to their provider for the purposes of claiming the new entitlement. We will send that guidance on out to you, but that's what we are fairly clear that it's saying. Parents who don't access tax-free childcare can apply now. There is no restriction on them. They don't have to wait for anything if they're looking to take up their entitlement from the summer. But they should be aware of the requirement to reconfirm through their Childcare Choices childcare account every 3 months. And if they applied in the very early days, this may affect their summer term because their reconfirmation will come close to but before 1st of April. As I say, we're reviewing the further information from DfE. We do have it and we will send it out later in the week. So that's from a parent's perspective. You'll also be aware, I think, we're also acutely aware that when the time comes for submitting your summer term funding claims, you will need a means of validating those codes for funding purposes. And our suppliers, our software suppliers, who are Capita, who provide a portal, are also very aware of it. We've been liaising with them, and they've been working extremely hard to develop the appropriate software, which they were only really able to finalize the specification for after the end of November, once the DfE produced their final consultation response on the new entitlements. So we've been working with them. We've been working with our IT team in the county council. Capita have made their release. We are hoping that we will be able to test it very shortly. We obviously want to make sure it works before we make it available to you. And at this stage, we are expecting that software will be available to you and will be functioning so that you can confirm parents' eligibility for the new entitlement in the portal by the time that we need you to do the summer estimate task. We haven't tested it yet. We haven't got it yet, so we can't say that at this stage for sure, but that's what we are expecting. Okay, so finally, just recapping on the summer funding period, what can you expect? For 3 and 4 year olds, an hourly rate of £5.40. Deprivation, where it is applicable, working in the same way as before. So for levels of deprivation based on home postcodes of the child, payable as an additional hourly amount. And we will continue to calculate that in the way that we do at the moment. Early years pupil premium, we're eligible at 68 pence per hour, and then an annual allocation of Disability Access Fund for the coming financial year from April of £910, paid once each year as a lump sum. That's 3 and 4 year olds. For the 2 year olds, so the targeted twos, the hourly rate will be £8. There is not a deprivation element for funded twos, but there is an early years pupil premium element payable, and that will be new for that age group of children. And similarly, Disability Access Fund, also payable where eligible, and that is also new. And you'll notice that the funding rates for the 2 year olds working parents are the same. Those children may also be eligible for early years pupil premium and Disability Access Fund. But there are obviously specific criteria apply for each of those. And just finally, the new allocation for 9-month-old to 2 year olds. There's no money for that because it hasn't started yet. It starts in the autumn. The one thing that's missing from that picture at the moment is detail on the rates that will be payable for SEN inclusion funding. That's because that is still being worked on. We have the overall allocations, but we need to look at the best way to distribute that and to meet the anticipated demand for the coming year, knowing that there is an increase in numbers there and that more children will be coming on stream as eligible for SEN inclusion funding. The one footnote there that I hadn't mentioned already, for 3 and 4 year olds, the early years pupil premium is only paid for universal hours for 3 and 4 year olds, not for extended hours. Okay, I think that covers the second section on the new entitlement. Just a brief input on local authority support. This is all very, very new. It's new to you. It's obviously new to us as well, though we have had a bit of a head start because for the last year or more, we've been part of the discussions happening nationally for working groups that DFE, Department for Education, have established, both on early years expansion and I think particularly on the expansion of wraparound for school-aged children. We are hoping that we'll be announced as an early adopter of that wraparound program. That information will be coming out imminently, so Cambridgeshire will be moving ahead more quickly on that. Annette, I can't see you, but if you wanted to say anything more about that, do jump in.
Sorry, about the early adopter, you mean, or about the work in general?
About the wraparound program generally.
Yeah, so we were invited to be one of just a few local authorities to co-design the wraparound offer. And it's been very interesting, and I'm very proud that we've been able to influence quite heavily some of the original language and approaches that were being used. As Graham says, we are hoping to be told that we have become an early adopter, but that news is not out quite yet. And if that does happen, that means we will be implementing the wraparound offer earlier than most other local authorities in the country. As Graham's mentioned, we have been involved in quite a number of DFE working groups in the last 12 months. So alongside the early years policy group, which has taken us to all sorts of topics, we've also done quite a lot of work around childminder agencies, and really are a bit of a go-to for the DFE for many aspects of their work. So what that means is that the Cambridgeshire kind of experiences and flavour are most definitely influencing policy, which can only be a good thing.
Thanks very much, Annette. It doesn't mean that everything that we'd hoped for in terms of the new entitlements and guidance has come to fruition. It doesn't make us any less frustrated about some of the things that are not quite right, but it does mean that we feel like we've tried to represent the sector and establish a realistic basis for moving forward. So we have to make detailed plans. We've been given some numbers, some potentially quite big numbers from government as to the additional places that are likely to be required to meet the new entitlements in full, particularly in September 2025, when those entitlements increase. And we recognise that you as providers will need input, you'll need support, you'll need potentially professional development, and you'll need everything that we can do to help in finding and helping you retain the people to deliver the high quality care that you deliver in spades for us at the moment. We are working very hard on recruitment and retention activity. We've got a career pathway for early years and childcare through our qualification centre, and we've been building around that with the notion of our trainee hubs, where we've supported providers to identify and work with people in their local communities who want to become early years and childcare practitioners, and to develop them and see those people through work placements on a voluntary basis as they gain skills and knowledge and assess their own suitability to do that work. And that's very exciting, and that's alongside other work that is happening with the sector to recruit and retain staff. Okay, not too much more from me now. Something around the guidance which supports us nationally and locally in terms of how we want the sector to operate, and particularly on the funding side. So in terms of national guidance, the Department for Education has reissued its 2 main documents. They're readable on the web now, and the links are in the presentation, which we'll send out afterwards. The operational guidance is the kind of higher level national rules and processes, and the statutory guidance goes into a bit more detail and sets things out from the council's perspective, the local authority's perspective. But what that includes, is lots of information about charging and how things should be offered and all of that kind of thing. It's largely been rewritten to make sure that it includes the new age groups and the timescales and the processes for those new entitlements. But it's also been changed at the margins to talk about how charging should work and how information to parents should be presented to help them make the best decisions for them about what the best provision is that meets their needs. What we'll be doing is working with our provider reference group and possibly a small potentially subgroup of that group, and maybe adding 1 or 2 other providers to that, to look at the new national guidance and how we can help the sector to operate in the most transparent and fairest way for parents and in a way that is sustainable. We recognise that there are significant pressures, particularly on the 3 and 4-year-old rate, and those pressures are well documented and are nationally known. And the implications of those for provider sustainability are significant. What we would hope to achieve is to make the most of the new rates, which have been designed to be realistic and sustainable, at least for the time being. And so we'll be very much hoping that we can present those offers to parents in a way that genuinely gives them good value for what the government is paying and minimises any of the frustrations around additional charging, which are frequent in terms of how we have to engage with the sector. So from that point of view, I'd just like to say there will be further work with our reference group on SEN inclusion funding and charging. And following that work, we will be looking to issue a new local provider agreement for 2024. Our reference group meeting is scheduled for next week, and we will be sending out further information to you as soon as we have it. On the final slide here, there are some links for additional information, which you'll be able to look at when the slides are sent out to you. So the paper that went to Schools Forum, which goes into a bit more detail on some of the early years expenditure. The DFE Easy Explainer, which talks about how the rates, the headline rates, convert into what you as providers receive. And a program on Radio 4 about the sector, which talked a lot about the funding and gave a fairly balanced view, and even included, I think, one of our childminders. So I'm going to stop the recording now.
Graham, there's a technical question around reconfirmation of codes in the chat that I